My name is Brittany Coleman, and I'm 28 years old. Standing outside our family mansion, after being publicly humiliated at my father's 75th birthday party, I clutched the envelope that would change everything. My sister Stephanie had just announced to 50 guests that I was no longer family, and I had discovered I'd been written out of Dad's will completely. But what they didn't know was that I had been planning this moment for 6 months, and the DNA test results in my hands would destroy their perfect little world. Before we dive into this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button if you're ready for some serious family drama, and don't forget to subscribe, because trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next when everything they thought they knew about our family gets turned completely upside down. 6 months earlier, my life seemed perfectly normal. I was working as a marketing director at a successful firm in downtown Chicago, pulling in 6 figures, and feeling proud of the career I'd built from the ground up. The Coleman family had always been close, or so I thought. Dad, Harrison Coleman, had been widowed for 5 years since Mom passed from cancer, and he seemed to be finally finding his footing again. Stephanie and I had our usual sibling rivalry, but nothing that seemed serious or threatening to our family bond. Everything changed the day Dad called us for what he described as a family meeting. I drove to the family estate in Winnetka, that sprawling Georgian mansion where we'd grown up, expecting maybe news about his retirement plans, or some business decision regarding Coleman Industries, the marketing firm he'd built from nothing 40 years ago. Instead, I walked into the living room to find Dad sitting next to a stunning blonde woman who looked barely older than me. Her name was Crystal, and she was 32 years old, which made her only 4 years older than me and a full 26 years younger than Dad. "Girls, I'd like you to meet Crystal," Dad announced with a smile I hadn't seen since before Mom got sick. "We've been dating for 3 months, and I've asked her to marry me." The engagement ring on her finger was massive, easily 3 carats, and I recognized it immediately. It had been my grandmother's ring, the one Mom always said would go to Dad's future daughter-in-law someday. I had assumed that meant it would go to whoever Stephanie, or I married, not to Dad's new wife. My initial reaction was shock, but I tried to be supportive. Dad deserved happiness, and if Crystal made him happy, then I wanted to give her a chance. Stephanie's reaction was completely different. She immediately jumped up, hugged Crystal, and started gushing about wedding plans and how excited she was to have a new mom. The enthusiasm seemed over the top, but I chalked it up to Stephanie always being more emotional than me. Over the following weeks, I started noticing changes in the family dynamic that made me increasingly uncomfortable. Crystal moved into the family home almost immediately, and she began making changes to the house that felt disrespectful to Mom's memory. She redecorated the master bedroom completely, donating all of Mom's belongings to charity without consulting Stephanie or me. When I tried to express concern about preserving some of Mom's personal items, Crystal sweetly explained that Dad needed to move forward, and that keeping shrine-like spaces wasn't healthy for him. What bothered me most was how quickly Stephanie aligned herself with Crystal's perspective on everything. When I suggested we should at least keep Mom's jewelry for sentimental reasons, Stephanie accused me of being stuck in the past, and jealous that Dad had found love again. Every family decision suddenly became a 2-against-1 vote, with Dad increasingly deferring to Crystal's wishes, and Stephanie enthusiastically supporting whatever Crystal wanted. The first major attack came during a family dinner 6 weeks after the engagement announcement. I had made an offhand comment to a family friend about hoping Dad was taking things slowly given how quickly the relationship had progressed. Somehow, this got back to Stephanie, who transformed my expression of concern into something much more malicious. She told Dad that I had called Crystal a gold digger, and said she was only interested in his money. When Dad confronted me about this supposed comment, I tried to explain that I had never used those words, and that I only wanted him to be careful. But Crystal was there during the conversation, tears streaming down her face as she talked about how hard it was to be misunderstood, and how she'd never wanted to come between a family. Dad's reaction was swift and devastating. He reduced my access to the family trust fund, explaining that my attitude toward his happiness was disappointing and hurtful. That night, I realized this wasn't just about Dad finding new love. There was something calculated happening here, and I was being systematically pushed out of my own family. Stephanie's behavior was particularly confusing, because we had always been close despite our differences. Sure, she was 3 years older and had always been Dad's favorite, but we had supported each other through Mom's illness and death. This sudden alliance with Crystal against me felt like a betrayal that cut deeper than anything Dad or Crystal could do. I decided I needed to understand what was really happening in my family, and that meant doing some investigation of my own. If there was something about Crystal that Dad and Stephanie couldn't see, I was going to find it. Little did I know that what I would discover would be far more shocking than a simple case of a gold digger targeting a wealthy widower. My first step was hiring a private investigator. Jake Morrison came highly recommended by a lawyer friend, and his background in financial fraud made him perfect for what I suspected might be a case of someone targeting Dad's wealth. Jake was in his early 40s, a former FBI agent who specialized in background investigations and fraud detection. When I explained the situation, he nodded knowingly and told me he'd seen similar cases involving wealthy older men and much younger women. The pattern is usually pretty predictable, Jake explained, during our first meeting at his downtown office. They find vulnerable targets, usually recent widowers, and they move fast. The goal is to get married and secure inheritance rights before anyone can really investigate their background. What makes your case interesting is the sister factor. Usually family members are the ones who spot the red flags, not the ones helping to silence concerns. Jake's initial research into Crystal's background yielded some interesting results. Her full name was Crystal Marie Stevens, and she had lived in 3 different cities over the past 10 years. In each location, she had been involved with significantly older, wealthy men. While Jake couldn't prove anything criminal, the pattern was certainly suspicious. More importantly, he discovered that Crystal and Stephanie had been in contact for months before Dad supposedly met Crystal at a charity fundraiser. The evidence was in cell phone records, restaurant receipts, and hotel bookings. Stephanie and Crystal had been meeting regularly at upscale locations throughout the city, spending hours together, and clearly planning something. The timeline showed that these meetings began 4 months before Dad's first date with Crystal, which meant their chance encounter at the fundraiser had been anything but random. When I confronted Stephanie with this evidence, she didn't deny the meetings, but claimed she had been helping Crystal adjust to Chicago, after they met through mutual friends. Her explanation was that Crystal was new to the city and needed help navigating social circles where she might meet quality men. According to Stephanie, she had thought Dad and Crystal would be perfect for each other, so she orchestrated their meeting as a favor to both of them. "I don't understand why you're so suspicious of everyone's motives," Stephanie said, during what became a heated argument in the family kitchen. "Crystal is perfect for Dad. She makes him happy, she's beautiful, she's intelligent, and she genuinely cares about him. The fact that I helped them meet doesn't make it some kind of conspiracy. It makes me a good matchmaker." But Jake's investigation revealed more troubling information. Crystal had a history of targeting wealthy widowers, and in 2 previous relationships, there had been allegations of financial impropriety. Nothing criminal had been proven, but both men had reported missing jewelry and suspicious financial transactions during their relationships with Crystal. One man had filed a police report claiming Crystal had stolen several valuable items, but the charges were dropped when Crystal produced receipts, showing the items had been gifts. The second major attack came 2 weeks after I started investigating. Crystal claimed that an expensive diamond bracelet had gone missing from her jewelry box, and she discovered it in my purse during a family gathering. The setup was obvious to me, but everyone else saw what appeared to be clear evidence of theft. Crystal played the victim perfectly, crying and saying she didn't want to believe I could do such a thing, but the evidence was right there. Dad's reaction was even more extreme than before. He threatened to call the police and have me arrested for theft. Only Stephanie's intervention prevented him from following through, with her suggesting that family therapy might be more appropriate than criminal charges. The message was clear: they could destroy my life whenever they wanted, and I should be grateful they were choosing not to do so. The isolation was becoming unbearable. Family gatherings became tense affairs where every word I spoke was scrutinized and twisted. Dad barely spoke to me directly anymore, communicating through Stephanie or Crystal when necessary. Extended family members began treating me differently too, clearly having heard some version of events that painted me as the problem. My salvation came from an unexpected source. Rosa Martinez had been the family housekeeper for 15 years, since shortly after Mom and Dad bought the Winnetka house. She had cared for Mom during her illness and had always been like family to us. Rosa approached me one evening as I was leaving the house after another tense dinner. "Miss Brittany, I need to tell you something," she said quietly, glancing around to make sure we weren't overheard. "I've been watching, and I've been writing things down. That woman, she's not what she seems, and your sister, she's helping her do bad things to your father and to you." Rosa revealed that she had been documenting Crystal's behavior since she moved into the house. Crystal regularly went through Dad's private papers when he was out, photographed important documents, and made copies of financial records. She had also been giving Dad medication that made him confused and more compliant, claiming it was vitamins recommended by her doctor friend. Most shocking of all, Rosa had overheard phone conversations where Crystal discussed timeline and securing everything before anyone could interfere. "Your sister brings papers for the woman to sign," Rosa continued. "Legal papers. They think I don't speak English good enough to understand, but I know what they are doing. They are stealing from your father, and they are making sure you can't stop them." Finally, I had an ally and proof that my instincts were correct. But I also realized the scope of what I was up against was much larger than I had imagined. This wasn't just about inheritance, or even garden variety fraud. This was a systematic takeover of my father's life, wealth, and decision-making capacity, and my own sister was not just enabling it, but actively participating in it. The bombshell came during what Dad announced as a special family dinner, on a cold February evening. He had asked Crystal to prepare his favorite meal, prime rib with all the traditional sides that Mom used to make for special occasions. The dining room was set formally with Mom's good china, and Dad seemed unusually serious as we gathered around the table that had hosted countless family celebrations throughout my childhood. "I've asked you both here tonight because I need to discuss some important changes I'm making," Dad began, his voice carrying the authoritative tone he used during business meetings. "As you know, Crystal and I will be married next month, and it's time I updated my estate planning to reflect my new circumstances and my assessment of what's best for this family's future." The will reading felt surreal, like watching someone else's life explode in slow motion. Dad explained that he had worked with attorneys to create a new estate plan that would reward loyalty and family commitment, while ensuring that Coleman Industries continued to thrive under capable leadership. The specific terms were devastating for me and clearly beneficial for Stephanie and Crystal. Stephanie would inherit the majority stake in Coleman Industries, along with the family estate in Winnetka, and the vacation home in Door County, Wisconsin. The business inheritance alone was worth over $8 million, and the properties added another $3 million to her windfall. Crystal would receive a substantial trust fund of $2 million, the condo in downtown Chicago, and rights to Dad's pension and Social Security benefits. She would also inherit Dad's collection of rare books and his vintage car collection. My inheritance consisted of Mom's jewelry, which I already had in my possession, and a small trust fund of $50,000 that would be distributed over 10 years. Everything else, including family heirlooms, photo albums, and even furniture that had belonged to my grandparents, would go to Stephanie or Crystal. Dad explained that this distribution reflected each person's commitment to family harmony and their support for my happiness and well-being. Brittany, your behavior over the past several months has shown me that you're not ready for the responsibilities that come with significant wealth, Dad said, his tone matter of fact, but devastating. You've questioned my judgment, you've been hostile toward Crystal, and you've created division in our family when I needed support most. Perhaps in the future, when you've matured and learned to put family first, we can revisit these arrangements. The humiliation was complete, but the worst was yet to come. 3 weeks later, Stephanie orchestrated what would become the most publicly devastating attack on my character and reputation. The annual Children's Hospital Charity Gala was one of Chicago's premier social events, attended by the city's most prominent families and business leaders. Our family had been major sponsors for over a decade, and Dad served on the hospital's board of directors. I attended the gala, hoping to maintain some semblance of normalcy, and to show our extended family and family friends that I wasn't the unstable, jealous daughter that Stephanie and Crystal were portraying me as. I wore Mom's emerald necklace and matching earrings, partly as a tribute to her memory and partly as a subtle reminder of my legitimate place in the Coleman family legacy. Stephanie's attack came during the silent auction portion of the evening. In front of approximately 200 guests, she approached me near the jewelry auction display and began speaking loudly enough to attract attention from surrounding tables. "Brittany, I'm concerned about you," she said, her voice carrying the condescending tone of someone addressing a troubled child. "Dad and I have been talking, and we think you might need professional help." She went on to detail what she described as my increasingly unstable behavior and my jealousy over Dad's happiness with Crystal. According to Stephanie, I had been making threats toward Crystal and had been obsessing over family finances in an unhealthy way. She suggested that I was going through something, and that the family was worried about my mental health and my ability to make rational decisions. The audience for this performance included family friends, business associates, and social connections that represented decades of relationship building. Stephanie's accusations were delivered with just the right mix of concern and authority to seem credible to people who didn't know the full story. The immediate effect was exactly what she intended. People began looking at me with a mixture of pity and suspicion, and conversations became awkward and strained whenever I approached. I tried to defend myself, to explain that Stephanie was manipulating the facts, and that I had legitimate concerns about Crystal's motives. But my protests only reinforced the narrative that I was obsessed and unable to accept Dad's happiness. The more I tried to explain the truth, the more I sounded like exactly the kind of jealous, unstable person Stephanie was describing. That night, I sat in my apartment and seriously considered giving up entirely. The emotional exhaustion was overwhelming, and the prospect of fighting against my own family seemed impossible. I had lost my father's trust, my sister's loyalty, and my standing in the community that had known me since childhood. The inheritance was becoming irrelevant compared to the complete destruction of my relationships and reputation. But Jake Morrison called the next morning with information that changed everything. His investigation had taken an unexpected turn, and what he had discovered would give me the weapons I needed to fight back. The DNA tests he had suggested months earlier had revealed a secret that would shake our family's foundation and expose just how deep the deception really went. Stephanie's campaign against me entered a new phase of systematic destruction that went far beyond family dynamics. She began reaching out to our extended family with carefully crafted stories about my supposed mental health crisis and my dangerous behavior toward Crystal and Dad. Our cousins in Milwaukee, our aunt and uncle in St. Louis, and even distant relatives I rarely spoke with received phone calls expressing Stephanie's concern for my well-being and her fear that I might do something drastic. The conversations followed a consistent script that Stephanie had clearly rehearsed. She would begin by expressing love and worry for me, then detail specific incidents that painted me as increasingly unstable. According to her version of events, I had been stalking Crystal, following her to the grocery store and the gym. She claimed I had been leaving threatening voicemails for Dad and had been obsessing over family finances in ways that suggested I was planning something harmful. Most devastatingly, Stephanie began calling my professional contacts under the guise of family concern. She reached out to my boss at the marketing firm, explaining that our family was dealing with a difficult situation with my mental health, and that they should be aware I might not be functioning at full capacity. She suggested that the stress of Dad's remarriage had triggered something in me and that I might need professional intervention. The fourth major attack was the most professionally damaging thing Stephanie could have done. She contacted my immediate supervisor, Jennifer Walsh, and explained that I had been having episodes at family gatherings where I became aggressive and paranoid. According to Stephanie, these episodes were becoming more frequent, and she was concerned about my ability to handle workplace stress and client relationships. Jennifer called me into her office on a Thursday afternoon, and the conversation was awkward and humiliating. She explained that she had received a call from my sister expressing concern about my personal situation and its potential impact on my work performance. While Jennifer assured me that my professional work remained excellent, she suggested that I might want to consider taking some time off to address family issues before they began affecting my career. The message was clear. Stephanie had successfully planted seeds of doubt about my stability and competence in my professional life. Even though I hadn't displayed any problematic behavior at work, the mere suggestion that I was having episodes was enough to make my supervisors cautious about giving me high-profile assignments or client-facing responsibilities. Around this same time, Crystal announced her pregnancy at a family dinner that I had reluctantly attended. The timing seemed suspicious to me, coming just as Dad's lawyers were finalizing the new will and just as questions about Crystal's background were starting to surface. But the pregnancy announcement effectively ended any possibility of Dad reconsidering his relationship or his estate planning decisions. "We're having a baby," Crystal announced, her hand protectively placed over her still flat stomach. "Harrison is going to be a father again, and Stephanie is going to be a big sister again." The way she phrased it, emphasizing Stephanie's role while completely ignoring my existence, felt deliberate and cruel. Dad's reaction was pure joy, and he immediately began talking about nursery preparations and college savings accounts. The pregnancy also provided Crystal with additional leverage in family discussions. Any criticism of her behavior could now be framed as stress that might harm the unborn baby. When I tried to express concern about some of Crystal's financial decisions, Dad shut down the conversation by saying he wouldn't allow me to create stress and negativity during Crystal's pregnancy. Stephanie's next move was to systematically destroy my relationships with extended family and family friends. She organized a family intervention meeting that included our Aunt Barbara, our cousin Michael, and 2 family friends who had known us since childhood. The stated purpose was to discuss my concerning behavior and to plan ways to help me get the support I needed. During this intervention, Stephanie presented what she described as evidence of my mental health decline. She showed photos of me that she claimed demonstrated weight loss and concerning changes in my appearance. She read excerpts from text messages I had sent to her, taken out of context to sound paranoid and obsessive. Most damagingly, she played a recording of a voicemail I had left for Dad where I sounded emotional and upset. The family members who attended this intervention came away convinced that I was having a breakdown, and that Stephanie was a devoted sister trying to help me. They agreed to distance themselves temporarily from me to avoid enabling my behavior, and they promised to support Stephanie in her efforts to get me help. The isolation was becoming complete, and I realized that Stephanie had successfully turned my own family into agents of my destruction. Dad reached the point where he refused to speak to me directly, communicating only through Stephanie when absolutely necessary. When I tried to call him, he wouldn't answer. When I stopped by the house, Crystal would politely explain that my visits were too stressful, given her pregnancy, and that Dad thought it would be better if I took some space to work on my issues. The final blow in this phase came when I discovered that Stephanie had been intercepting my mail and email communications to Dad. She had convinced him to change his email password and to have his mail forwarded to her address, temporarily, while he adjusted to married life. This meant that my attempts to communicate directly with Dad were being filtered through Stephanie, who could read, edit, or simply delete anything she didn't want him to see. I was effectively cut off from my own father, my professional reputation was under attack, and my extended family believed I was having a mental health crisis. The isolation was so complete that I began to wonder if Stephanie might be right about my mental state. The constant stress and repeated attacks were taking a psychological toll that made it difficult to think clearly or maintain perspective on the situation. But Jake Morrison's investigation was yielding results that would soon give me the ammunition I needed to fight back. The DNA tests had been completed, and the results would reveal a secret that had been hidden for over 30 years. What Stephanie didn't know was that her entire identity, her inheritance, and her sense of superiority were built on a lie that would soon be exposed. The fifth and most devastating attack came on a grey Monday morning in March, when a sheriff's deputy knocked on my apartment door with legal papers. Stephanie had filed for a restraining order against me, claiming that I had been stalking and threatening both her and Crystal. The petition included sworn statements alleging that I had made verbal threats against Crystal's unborn baby, that I had been following Crystal to medical appointments, and that I had left disturbing messages on Stephanie's voicemail threatening physical harm. The evidence was fabricated, but it was convincingly presented. Stephanie had used voice modification technology to create threatening messages that supposedly came from me, and she had security camera footage from locations where Crystal claimed I had been stalking her. The footage was real, but it showed me at places I had legitimate reasons to be: the grocery store, the bank, the coffee shop near my office, but Stephanie presented it as evidence of a stalking pattern. The restraining order required me to stay at least 500 feet away from Stephanie, Crystal, Dad, and any property they owned or frequented. Since this included the family business, the family home, and several restaurants and social venues where our family regularly gathered, I was effectively banned from most of the places where I might encounter any family members. The legal fees for fighting the restraining order quickly drained my savings account. I hired attorney David Richardson, whose specialty in family law and restraining order cases came highly recommended, but his hourly rate of $450 meant that even basic legal research was costing me thousands of dollars. The irony was that my limited trust fund income wasn't sufficient to pay for the legal representation I needed to protect myself from losing my family entirely. My professional situation deteriorated rapidly after the restraining order became a matter of public record. Jennifer Walsh called me into her office again, this time with the Human Resources Director present, to discuss the legal situation that was now affecting my ability to represent the company professionally. While they couldn't fire me for being the victim of family problems, they could indeed remove me from client-facing projects and high-visibility assignments. We need to be cautious about situations where personal legal issues might reflect poorly on the firm, Jennifer explained. Until this family situation is resolved, we think it's best if you focus on internal projects and administrative work. The demotion was humiliating and financially devastating, as my commission-based salary structure meant that losing major clients translated directly into reduced income. Stephanie's rumor campaign reached its peak during this period, with carefully planted stories circulating throughout Chicago's professional and social networks about my supposed mental health crisis and legal troubles. The stories were always presented as expressions of concern from a worried sister, but the effect was to destroy my professional reputation and social standing. Former clients began requesting different account representatives, and colleagues started treating me with the awkward sympathy reserved for people going through public breakdowns. My friendship network began crumbling under the pressure of Stephanie's systematic campaign. Friends who had known me for years started distancing themselves, either because they believed Stephanie's stories, or because they didn't want to get involved in what appeared to be a messy family drama. Social invitations stopped coming, and even casual friendships became strained and uncomfortable. The isolation was so complete that I began spending entire weekends alone in my apartment, afraid to go anywhere I might encounter family members or family friends who would look at me with pity or suspicion. The stress was affecting my sleep, my appetite, and my ability to concentrate at work, which only reinforced the narrative that I was having a mental health crisis. Rosa Martinez was fired during this period after Dad discovered that she had been speaking with me about Crystal's behavior. Crystal claimed that Rosa had been disrespectful, and that she felt unsafe having her in the house given my threats and Rosa's loyalty to me. Dad fired Rosa immediately, ending 15 years of employment without severance pay or references. The loss of Rosa as an ally was devastating, not just because she had been providing crucial information, but because she had been one of the few people who believed in my version of events. Her firing also served as a warning to any other potential allies about the consequences of supporting me against Stephanie and Crystal's narrative. I reached the lowest point of this entire ordeal on a Thursday evening in late March, when I seriously considered leaving Chicago permanently. I had been applying for jobs in other cities, thinking that a fresh start away from the family drama might be my only option for rebuilding my life. The prospect of abandoning my father to whatever Stephanie and Crystal were planning felt like surrender, but I was running out of resources to continue fighting. That night, I drafted what I intended to be a final letter to Dad, explaining my side of the story and apologizing for not being able to protect him from what I believed was happening to him. I planned to mail the letter and then move to Denver, where a former colleague had offered me a position with a marketing firm that specialized in outdoor recreation companies. But Jake Morrison called that evening with the results that would change everything. The DNA tests had been completed, and the results revealed a secret that had been hidden for over 30 years. What Jake had discovered would give me the evidence I needed not just to defend myself, but to expose the entire conspiracy that Stephanie and Crystal had built around lies and manipulation. "Brittany, you need to sit down for this," Jake said when I answered his call. "What I'm about to tell you is going to change everything you thought you knew about your family. And it's going to give you exactly what you need to turn this whole situation around." The DNA test results that Jake Morrison revealed that Thursday evening were so shocking that I initially thought there had been some kind of laboratory error. According to the genetic analysis, Stephanie was not Harrison Coleman's biological daughter. The man I had always known as our father had no genetic relationship to the sister, who had been systematically destroying my life for the past 6 months. The probability of paternity is 0%, Jake explained, reading from the laboratory report. There's no possibility that Harrison Coleman is Stephanie's biological father. But here's what makes this even more interesting: the tests confirm that you are definitely his daughter. So while Stephanie has been positioning herself as the loyal daughter and rightful heir, she's actually been living a lie for 32 years. The implications were staggering. Everything Stephanie had done to secure her inheritance, from aligning with Crystal to destroying my reputation, was based on a fraudulent claim to family membership. Her legal right to inherit Coleman Industries was non-existent, and her entire identity as Harrison Coleman's eldest daughter was built on a secret that my mother had taken to her grave. Jake's investigation into family history revealed that my mother, Helen Coleman, had been having an affair during the time when Stephanie was conceived. The affair had been with a man named Robert Marshall, who had been Dad's business partner during the early years of Coleman Industries. Robert had died in a car accident when Stephanie was 2 years old, which explained why the secret had never been exposed by his presence in our lives. Your mother never told your father the truth, Jake continued. Based on the timeline and some documents I found in old business records, I think she was afraid that revealing Stephanie's true parentage would destroy both her marriage and your father's business partnership with Robert Marshall. So she chose to keep the secret and raise Stephanie as Harrison's daughter. The more I learned about the timeline, the more pieces of family history began making sense. Mom's persistent guilt about something she could never discuss, her special attention to Stephanie that had always seemed like favoritism, and her deathbed insistence that Dad should always take care of both girls equally, all took on new meaning in light of this revelation. But the DNA results were just the beginning of what Jake had discovered. His investigation into Crystal's background had revealed a pattern of criminal behavior that went far beyond simple gold digging. Crystal Marie Stevens had been married 4 times previously, always to significantly older, wealthy men. 2 of those marriages had ended with her husband's death under suspicious circumstances, though nothing criminal had ever been proven. More immediately relevant was evidence that Crystal's current pregnancy was fabricated. Jake had managed to obtain medical records through a contact in the healthcare industry, and the records showed that Crystal had been receiving fertility treatments that had been unsuccessful. The pregnancy announcement had been timed to coincide with Dad's will changes, but medical evidence suggested that no pregnancy actually existed. She's been using a combination of hormone treatments and prosthetic devices to fake the pregnancy symptoms, Jake explained. The morning sickness, the weight gain, even the ultrasound photos she's been showing your father, it's all been carefully orchestrated to support the lie. Jake's most damaging discovery involved financial records that showed Stephanie and Crystal had been systematically stealing from Dad for months. They had been using Dad's confusion and medication-induced compliance to authorize transfers from his business accounts to accounts they controlled. The total amount stolen exceeded $400,000, and the transfers had been disguised as legitimate business expenses and charitable contributions. Armed with this information, I realized that I finally had the evidence I needed to not only defend myself, but to completely destroy the conspiracy that had been built around me. But I also knew that I needed to be strategic about how I used this information. If I moved too quickly or confronted them directly, they might be able to destroy evidence or disappear before facing consequences. My first move was to start selectively sharing information with key family members who could help expose the truth. I began with our cousin Michael in Milwaukee, who had been sympathetic to Stephanie's concerns about my mental health, but who had also known our family long enough to recognize inconsistencies in recent events. I called Michael and explained that I had discovered some disturbing information about Crystal's background and Stephanie's financial activities. I didn't reveal the DNA results immediately, but I shared enough evidence about the theft and fraud to make him question the narrative he had been accepting about my supposed breakdown. "Michael, I need you to look at some documents I'm going to send you," I explained during our phone conversation. "I know Stephanie has been telling everyone that I'm having mental health problems, but I've hired a private investigator, and we've discovered evidence of serious criminal activity that's been targeting Dad." Michael agreed to review the evidence, and his background as a certified public accountant made him ideal for understanding the financial fraud documentation. Within 48 hours, he called me back with a completely different perspective on the family situation. "Brittany, this is serious criminal activity," Michael said. "If these documents are authentic, then Stephanie and Crystal have been systematically stealing from Uncle Harrison, and they've been using his medical condition to make him compliant with transactions he probably doesn't understand." I also reached out to Dr. Patricia Hendricks, the family lawyer who had been handling Dad's estate planning for over 20 years. Patricia had been uncomfortable with the sudden changes to Dad's will, especially given the speed with which the revisions had been made and the dramatic shift in beneficiaries. When I shared Jake's evidence with her, she immediately understood the legal implications. If Stephanie isn't Harrison's biological daughter, then her inheritance is based on fraud, Patricia explained. And if Crystal has been systematically drugging Harrison to make him compliant, then every legal document he's signed in the past 6 months could be invalidated due to lack of mental capacity. Patricia agreed to help me build a legal case against Stephanie and Crystal, but she warned me that exposing the truth would be traumatic for Dad, and would likely result in serious criminal charges for both women. The choice I faced was whether to protect Dad from the painful truth about Stephanie's parentage, or to expose everything necessary to save him from continued exploitation. I decided that Dad deserved to know the truth, regardless of how painful it might be. But I also knew that the revelation needed to be handled carefully, with medical and psychological support available to help him process information that would fundamentally change his understanding of his family and his life. The counterattack was beginning, but I knew that Stephanie and Crystal would not go down without a fight. They had too much to lose to surrender easily, and their willingness to destroy my reputation and relationships proved that they were capable of desperate measures when cornered. My strategic campaign to expose the truth began with addressing Dad's medical situation, which was the foundation of everything Stephanie and Crystal had been able to accomplish. With Dr. Patricia Hendricks' help, I arranged for Dad to undergo a comprehensive medical evaluation with Dr. Samuel Chen, a geriatric specialist who specialized in identifying medical manipulation and cognitive impairment in elderly patients. The evaluation revealed exactly what Jake Morrison's investigation had suggested. Dad had been receiving a cocktail of medications that Crystal had been presenting as vitamins and health supplements. The combination included mild sedatives that reduced his anxiety, but also impaired his judgment, memory enhancers that actually caused confusion when combined with the sedatives, and blood pressure medications that weren't necessary given his actual health status. "Your father has been systematically medicated to keep him compliant and confused," Dr. Chen explained during a confidential meeting at his office. "The medications aren't dangerous in terms of causing permanent damage, but they've been affecting his ability to think clearly and make informed decisions. This level of medical manipulation constitutes elder abuse, and it explains why he's been so susceptible to influence and suggestion." Dr. Chen agreed to work with us to gradually remove Dad from the unauthorized medications while monitoring his cognitive recovery. The plan was to help Dad regain his mental clarity without alerting Crystal to the fact that her control mechanism was being dismantled. Meanwhile, Jake Morrison's continued investigation revealed even more damaging information about Crystal's criminal history. Working with contacts in law enforcement agencies across the country, Jake had identified 2 previous cases where Crystal had been investigated for elder abuse and financial exploitation. In both cases, the charges had been dropped when the victims died before trials could be completed, but the patterns were identical to what was happening with Dad. She's done this before, and she's gotten away with it because her victims either died or became too confused to testify against her, Jake explained. But this time, we've caught her in the middle of the scheme, and we have documentation of every step of the process. Jake had also identified Crystal's previous victims and contacted their surviving family members. These families provided additional evidence of Crystal's methods and helped establish a pattern of behavior that would be crucial for any criminal prosecution. The most explosive revelation involved Stephanie's birth certificate, which Jake discovered had been altered shortly after Robert Marshall's death. The original hospital records showed Robert Marshall listed as the father, but the official birth certificate on file with the state showed Harrison Coleman as the father. The alteration had been made when Stephanie was 3 years old, probably as part of Mom's effort to permanently conceal the truth about Stephanie's parentage. This means Stephanie has been living with a fraudulent birth certificate for almost 30 years, Jake explained. Every legal document she's ever signed, every inheritance claim she's ever made, and every business transaction she's been involved in has been based on false identity documentation. With this evidence in hand, I began strategically leaking information to other family members to gradually build support for exposing the truth. I started with family members who had been most susceptible to Stephanie's manipulation, showing them evidence of the financial theft and medical abuse without immediately revealing the DNA results. The response was exactly what I had hoped for. Family members who had been convinced that I was having a mental health crisis began questioning the narrative they had accepted about recent events. The evidence of systematic theft and fraud was impossible to dismiss, and it made them reconsider everything Stephanie had told them about my supposed instability. My professional reputation also began to recover, as word spread about the investigation and the evidence I had gathered. Colleagues who had been distancing themselves started to understand that my obsession with family finances had actually been legitimate concern about criminal activity. Jennifer Walsh apologized for the way the firm had handled my situation and offered to restore my client assignments and commission structure. The breakthrough came when I was able to prove that Crystal's pregnancy was fabricated. Using Jake's medical evidence and some carefully planned surveillance, we documented Crystal purchasing prosthetic pregnancy devices and visiting a clinic that specialized in hormone treatments for women trying to fake pregnancies for insurance fraud purposes. When confronted with photographic evidence of these activities, Crystal's web of lies began to unravel. She initially claimed that the prosthetic devices were for a surprise she was planning for Dad, but the medical records Jake had obtained made it impossible for her to maintain the pregnancy lie. Dad's cognitive improvement, as the unauthorized medications were eliminated from his system, made him increasingly aware that something was wrong with the situation he found himself in. He began questioning financial transactions he couldn't remember authorizing and expressing confusion about legal documents he had supposedly signed. "I don't remember agreeing to any of these transfers," Dad told Dr. Hendricks during a meeting at her office. "And I don't understand why Brittany isn't involved in these decisions. This isn't how I wanted my estate planning handled." The turning point came when Dad discovered that Crystal had been accessing his personal bank accounts and credit cards without his knowledge. Bank records showed transactions that Dad couldn't remember making, including large cash withdrawals and purchases of expensive jewelry that didn't match anything Crystal had shown him. Dr. Hendricks advised Dad to change all his passwords, revoke Crystal's access to his financial accounts, and begin the process of reviewing and potentially invalidating the legal documents he had signed while under the influence of unauthorized medications. Stephanie's response to these developments was to escalate her attacks on my credibility, but the evidence was now so overwhelming that her accusations began to seem desperate rather than convincing. When she claimed that I had somehow manipulated the bank records and medical evidence, family members started to recognize the absurdity of her suggestions. The stage was set for the final confrontation, which would take place at Dad's 75th birthday party. By this time, I had assembled a complete case against both Stephanie and Crystal, with evidence of fraud, theft, medical abuse, identity falsification, and conspiracy. The only question remaining was whether Dad would have the strength to face the truth about the daughter he had raised and loved for 32 years. My strategic campaign to expose the truth began with addressing Dad's medical situation, which was the foundation of everything Stephanie and Crystal had been able to accomplish. With Dr. Patricia Hendricks' help, I arranged for Dad to undergo a comprehensive medical evaluation with Dr. Samuel Chen, a geriatric specialist who specialized in identifying medical manipulation and cognitive impairment in elderly patients. The evaluation revealed exactly what Jake Morrison's investigation had suggested. Dad had been receiving a cocktail of medications that Crystal had been presenting as vitamins and health supplements. The combination included mild sedatives that reduced his anxiety, but also impaired his judgment, memory enhancers that actually caused confusion when combined with the sedatives, and blood pressure medications that weren't necessary given his actual health status. Your father has been systematically medicated to keep him compliant and confused, Dr. Chen explained during a confidential meeting at his office. The medications aren't dangerous in terms of causing permanent damage, but they've been affecting his ability to think clearly and make informed decisions. This level of medical manipulation constitutes elder abuse, and it explains why he's been so susceptible to influence and suggestion. Dr. Chen agreed to work with us to gradually remove Dad from the unauthorized medications, while monitoring his cognitive recovery. The plan was to help Dad regain his mental clarity, without alerting Crystal to the fact that her control mechanism was being dismantled. Meanwhile, Jake Morrison's continued investigation revealed even more damaging information about Crystal's criminal history. Working with contacts in law enforcement agencies across the country, Jake had identified 2 previous cases where Crystal had been investigated for elder abuse and financial exploitation. In both cases, the charges had been dropped when the victims died before trials could be completed, but the patterns were identical to what was happening with Dad. She's done this before, and she's gotten away with it because her victims either died or became too confused to testify against her, Jake explained. But this time, we've caught her in the middle of the scheme, and we have documentation of every step of the process. Jake had also identified Crystal's previous victims and contacted their surviving family members. These families provided additional evidence of Crystal's methods and helped establish a pattern of behavior that would be crucial for any criminal prosecution. The most explosive revelation involved Stephanie's birth certificate, which Jake discovered had been altered shortly after Robert Marshall's death. The original hospital records showed Robert Marshall listed as the father, but the official birth certificate on file with the state showed Harrison Coleman as the father. The alteration had been made when Stephanie was 3 years old, probably as part of Mom's effort to permanently conceal the truth about Stephanie's parentage. This means Stephanie has been living with a fraudulent birth certificate for almost 30 years, Jake explained. Every legal document she's ever signed, every inheritance claim she's ever made, and every business transaction she's been involved in has been based on false identity documentation. With this evidence in hand, I began strategically leaking information to other family members to gradually build support for exposing the truth. I started with family members who had been most susceptible to Stephanie's manipulation, showing them evidence of the financial theft and medical abuse without immediately revealing the DNA results. The response was exactly what I had hoped for. Family members who had been convinced that I was having a mental health crisis began questioning the narrative they had accepted about recent events. The evidence of systematic theft and fraud was impossible to dismiss, and it made them reconsider everything Stephanie had told them about my supposed instability. My professional reputation also began to recover, as word spread about the investigation and the evidence I had gathered. Colleagues who had been distancing themselves started to understand that my obsession with family finances had actually been legitimate concern about criminal activity. Jennifer Walsh apologized for the way the firm had handled my situation and offered to restore my client assignments and commission structure. The breakthrough came when I was able to prove that Crystal's pregnancy was fabricated. Using Jake's medical evidence and some carefully planned surveillance, we documented Crystal purchasing prosthetic pregnancy devices and visiting a clinic that specialized in hormone treatments for women trying to fake pregnancies for insurance fraud purposes. When confronted with photographic evidence of these activities, Crystal's web of lies began to unravel. She initially claimed that the prosthetic devices were for a surprise she was planning for Dad, but the medical records Jake had obtained made it impossible for her to maintain the pregnancy lie. Dad's cognitive improvement, as the unauthorized medications were eliminated from his system, made him increasingly aware that something was wrong with the situation he found himself in. He began questioning financial transactions. He couldn't remember authorizing and expressing confusion about legal documents he had supposedly signed. "I don't remember agreeing to any of these transfers," Dad told Dr. Hendricks during a meeting at her office. "And I don't understand why Brittany isn't involved in these decisions. This isn't how I wanted my estate planning handled." The turning point came when Dad discovered that Crystal had been accessing his personal bank accounts and credit cards without his knowledge. Bank records showed transactions that Dad couldn't remember making, including large cash withdrawals and purchases of expensive jewelry that didn't match anything Crystal had shown him. Dr. Hendricks advised Dad to change all his passwords, revoke Crystal's access to his financial accounts, and begin the process of reviewing and potentially invalidating the legal documents he had signed while under the influence of unauthorized medications. Stephanie's response to these developments was to escalate her attacks on my credibility, but the evidence was now so overwhelming that her accusations began to seem desperate rather than convincing. When she claimed that I had somehow manipulated the bank records and medical evidence, family members started to recognize the absurdity of her suggestions. The stage was set for the final confrontation, which would take place at Dad's 75th birthday party. By this time, I had assembled a complete case against both Stephanie and Crystal, with evidence of fraud, theft, medical abuse, identity falsification, and conspiracy. The only question remaining was whether Dad would have the strength to face the truth about the daughter he had raised and loved for 32 years. Part 9. The Public Confrontation ***. Dad's 75th birthday party was meant to be a celebration of his life and achievements, with 50 guests gathered at the family estate to honor the man who had built Coleman Industries from a small marketing firm into a multi-million-dollar business. Crystal had planned every detail of the event, from the catered dinner to the string quartet, presenting herself as the devoted wife who wanted to give her husband a perfect celebration. I arrived at the party armed with the complete evidence portfolio that Jake Morrison had assembled over 6 months of investigation. The DNA test results, financial records, medical documentation, and proof of Crystal's fabricated pregnancy were all organized in a presentation that would expose the entire conspiracy to our family and friends. Stephanie was in her element that evening, playing the role of devoted daughter and protective sister. She had invited several people specifically to serve as witnesses to what she planned to be my final humiliation and permanent exile from the family. Among the guests were business associates, family friends, and extended relatives, who would spread word of the evening's events throughout Chicago's social and professional networks. The confrontation began during the dinner hour, when Stephanie stood up to make what she announced as a difficult, but necessary, speech about family and loyalty. She began by praising Dad's wisdom and strength, then transitioned into expressing concern about family members who have been causing stress and division during this important time in Dad's life. "I've tried to be patient and understanding," Stephanie said, her voice carrying across the dining room to ensure everyone could hear. "But there comes a time when you have to choose between enabling destructive behavior and protecting the people you love. Brittany, your jealousy and your inability to accept Dad's happiness have gone too far." She went on to detail what she described as my campaign of harassment against Crystal and my refusal to respect Dad's decisions about his life and his estate. According to Stephanie, I had been stalking Crystal, threatening the family's well-being, and spreading lies about Crystal's character and motives. "You're not family anymore," Stephanie concluded, her words designed to be the final, definitive statement that would end my relationship with Dad and cement her position as his only legitimate daughter. "We've all tried to help you, but you've made it clear that you care more about money than you care about Dad's happiness." The room fell silent as guests waited for my response to what appeared to be a devastating and final confrontation. This was the moment Stephanie had been building toward for months, the public humiliation that would justify everything she had done to isolate me from the family and secure her inheritance. Instead of defending myself against her accusations, I stood up and began to distribute copies of the evidence portfolio to every guest at the party. The DNA test results were on top, with the laboratory letterhead clearly visible and the conclusions highlighted in yellow marker. Before anyone makes final judgments about family loyalty, I announced, "I think everyone should know the truth about who is actually family in this room." The reaction was immediate and explosive. Guests began reading the DNA results and passing them around the tables, with gasps and whispered conversations spreading throughout the dining room. Stephanie's face went white as she realized what was happening, but she couldn't stop the revelation without making herself look even more guilty. Dad's reaction was the most heartbreaking part of the evening. He read the DNA results 3 times, his hands shaking as he processed information that fundamentally changed his understanding of the family he thought he knew. The man who had raised Stephanie as his daughter for 32 years was learning that she had no biological relationship to him whatsoever. "Is this real?" Dad asked, his voice barely audible above the conversations happening throughout the room. "Patricia, you've reviewed these results." Dr. Hendricks confirmed the authenticity of the DNA tests and began explaining the legal implications of Stephanie's fraudulent inheritance claims. She also presented the evidence of financial theft, medical manipulation, and Crystal's false pregnancy, building a complete picture of the conspiracy that had been targeting Dad's wealth and well-being. Crystal's response was to try to leave the party immediately, claiming that the stress was dangerous for her pregnancy. But when challenged to provide current medical documentation of her condition, she couldn't produce any credible evidence. The prosthetic devices and hormone treatments were exposed when several female guests, who were actual mothers, pointed out inconsistencies in her supposed pregnancy symptoms. Stephanie's world collapsed in front of 50 witnesses as the evidence mounted against her. The financial theft was documented with bank records and forged signatures. The medical manipulation was confirmed by Dr. Chen's evaluation and the unauthorized medication that had been found in Dad's system. The falsified birth certificate was exposed with hospital records, showing Robert Marshall as Stephanie's actual father. "You've been stealing from him," our cousin Michael said, his voice filled with disgust as he reviewed the financial documents. "You've been drugging him to make him compliant, and you've been lying about who you are for 30 years. The guests at the party included 2 off-duty police officers who were family friends, and they immediately recognized the criminal nature of what had been exposed. They advised Dad to contact law enforcement and to take immediate steps to protect himself from further exploitation. Stephanie's final desperate move was to claim that I had fabricated all the evidence and that the DNA tests were somehow fraudulent. But the documentation was too comprehensive and came from too many independent sources to be dismissed as fabrication. The pattern of her behavior over the past 6 months, viewed in light of the evidence, made it clear that she had been systematically destroying my credibility to prevent exactly this kind of exposure. Everything I did was to protect this family, Stephanie claimed, but her words rang hollow in the face of overwhelming evidence of theft, fraud, and manipulation. Brittany has been trying to destroy Dad's happiness since the day he met Crystal. But the guests had seen the evidence, and they understood that I had been the victim of a conspiracy designed to steal my inheritance and destroy my relationship with my father. The restraining order, the rumors about my mental health, and the systematic isolation I had experienced were all revealed as tactics designed to prevent me from exposing the truth about Stephanie and Crystal's criminal activities. The evening ended with police being called to the family estate and both Stephanie and Crystal being arrested on charges of elder abuse, financial fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy. The 50 guests who witnessed the confrontation became witnesses to the criminal case that would follow, ensuring that the truth about what had happened to our family would be thoroughly documented and prosecuted. The legal resolution of the case against Stephanie and Crystal unfolded over the following 18 months, with both women facing serious criminal charges that reflected the scope of their conspiracy against Dad and our family. Stephanie was charged with fraud, identity theft, financial elder abuse, and conspiracy, while Crystal faced additional charges related to her pattern of targeting elderly victims across multiple states. The evidence that Jake Morrison had assembled proved to be comprehensive enough to support convictions on multiple counts. Stephanie's use of falsified identity documents spanning 3 decades resulted in federal charges, while the financial theft and medical manipulation resulted in state charges that carried significant prison sentences. Crystal's case became part of a larger federal investigation into elder abuse schemes targeting wealthy widowers. The FBI's Financial Crimes Division used her case to identify and prosecute similar schemes in other states, ultimately resulting in the protection of dozens of elderly victims who had been targeted by comparable conspiracies. Stephanie was ultimately sentenced to 8 years in federal prison, with an additional 4 years of supervised probation and restitution requirements that would continue for the rest of her life. Crystal received a 15-year sentence due to her status as the primary organizer of the scheme and her history of similar crimes against other victims. The will that Dad had signed while under the influence of unauthorized medications was declared invalid by the probate court, and his estate reverted to the original terms that had been established years earlier. This meant that I inherited the majority stake in Coleman Industries and the family properties, while Stephanie's fraudulent claims to inheritance were completely eliminated. Dad entered therapy to address both the trauma of discovering Stephanie's true parentage and his guilt over how I had been treated during the months when he was under Crystal's influence. The process of rebuilding our relationship was slow and sometimes painful, but it was ultimately successful, because we were both committed to healing the damage that had been done to our family. "I failed you as a father," Dad said during one of our family therapy sessions. "I let them manipulate me into doubting you, and I allowed them to steal the time we should have spent together during these important years of my life." The cognitive effects of Crystal's unauthorized medication regimen took several months to fully resolve, but Dad's mental clarity and decision-making ability gradually returned to normal. Dr. Chen's treatment plan helped restore Dad's confidence in his own judgment and gave him tools to recognize and resist manipulation in the future. Rosa Martinez was rehired with a significant raise and back pay for the time she had been unemployed due to her loyalty to our family. She also received a bonus and formal recognition for her role in documenting the evidence that ultimately led to Stephanie and Crystal's conviction. Dr. Patricia Hendricks helped establish a comprehensive estate plan, that included protections against future manipulation and clear guidelines for medical and financial decision-making as Dad aged. The new plan also included provisions for charitable giving and community service that reflected Dad's values and his desire to use his wealth to help others. I used my inheritance to establish the Helen Coleman Foundation for Elder Protection, named after my mother and dedicated to preventing the kind of abuse that Dad had experienced. The foundation provides legal assistance to elderly victims of financial fraud, supports research into medical manipulation of elderly patients, and educates families about recognizing signs of elder abuse. My professional reputation was fully restored, and I was promoted to senior partner at the marketing firm where I had worked throughout the crisis. The experience of investigating and exposing the conspiracy against Dad had given me skills and credibility that enhanced my ability to help other clients facing complex business and legal challenges. The extended family relationships that Stephanie had damaged were gradually repaired as relatives learned the truth about what had happened during the months when I had been portrayed as unstable and dangerous. Family gatherings became comfortable again, and holidays returned to being celebrations rather than exercises in navigating lies and manipulation. The personal healing process took longer than the legal resolution, partly because the betrayal by someone I had loved as a sister was emotionally devastating in ways that went beyond the financial and legal damage she had caused. Therapy helped me understand that Stephanie's behavior was driven by her own fear of losing her identity and position when the truth about her parentage was revealed. She probably sensed on some level that her place in the family was built on a secret, my therapist explained. When Crystal offered her a way to secure her inheritance permanently, it may have felt like her only option for protecting herself from a truth she was afraid to face. Understanding Stephanie's motivations didn't excuse her behavior, but it helped me process the grief of losing the sister I thought I knew and move toward forgiveness that was essential for my own peace of mind. The most important lesson I learned from this experience was that family isn't always defined by blood relationships, and blood relationships don't automatically create loyalty or love. Rosa Martinez showed more family loyalty than the sister I had grown up with, and Dr. Hendricks provided more protection and support than the woman who had claimed to be my father's wife. Dad and I developed a closer relationship after the crisis than we had ever had before, partly because we had both learned not to take family bonds for granted and partly because we had worked together to overcome the most difficult challenge either of us had ever faced. Today, 3 years after that devastating birthday party confrontation, our family has found a new equilibrium based on honesty, clear communication, and mutual respect. Dad is healthy and active at 78. Coleman Industries is thriving under my leadership, and the foundation we established has helped dozens of families avoid the kind of manipulation we experienced. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who were trying to manipulate or deceive someone you loved? Share your experiences in the comments below, because family drama can be incredibly isolating until you realize how many other people have faced similar challenges. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories about overcoming family betrayal and finding strength in the darkest moments. And please share this video with anyone who might be dealing with similar family manipulation, because sometimes knowing you're not alone can make all the difference in finding the courage to fight for what's right. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that the truth always has power, even when it takes time to surface. May you find the strength to protect the people you love and the wisdom to recognize when family bonds are real versus when they're just convenient lies.